What do a military-grade recreational flight simulator, a teeny tiny spaceship, the Reverend from Desperate Housewives, and the actress who replaced Claudia Wells in Back to the Future Part 2 and 3 all have in common? Well, I'm glad you asked. They're all linked by one thing, a 1989 state-of-the-art microscopic journey through the human body, which just happens to be the focus of this video. Around a year ago, I put out a video about the complete history of one of my favourite defunct theme park offerings of all time, the Wonders of Life Pavilion. And in that video, we discussed all of the Pavilion's restaurants and attractions, but prior to the release of my updated complete history video that will inevitably come, it's time to fill in some of the gaps with videos of their own. So today's focus is possibly the most intense ride, both in terms of physicality and subject matter, to ever grace Epcot territory, and possibly the most physically intense ride to ever grace Disney property.
Body Wars. Body, 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 body. This thrill ride takes its patrons on a journey never attempted by man inside a seemingly impossible destination, the human body.
Despite being largely forgotten about by all but those who rode it, and even some of those who did, it would be fair to define Body Wars as one of the most visually ambitious and potentially, depending how squeamish you are, gut-wrenching rides to ever exist at a Disney park. So I'm very excited to discuss its history. From start to finish, the ride was surrounded by this weird, almost indescribable air. Undermined by copycat attractions and with a less than stellar reputation, this ride, much like its housing pavilion, felt destined to fail before it even had the chance to succeed. But before we start our discussion, I'm Jo and I talk a lot about theme parks, tourism and abandoned/failed projects. So if this is the kind of thing you're interested in, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any of my fun upcoming content. Now, without further ado, this is the story of Disney World's first and most stomach-turning simulator ride, derived from one of the most intricate and ambitious ride concepts of all time, Body Wars. To start our story, we must go back even further than the ride's opening to one of my favourite documents of all time, Master Plan 5, which I would frame on my wall if I could. If you haven't been lucky enough to hear any of my musings on Master Plan 5 yet, it was basically the blueprint for Epcot. Released in 1979, the document outlined the vision for the park, loosely based on Walt Disney's original vision of a domestic and residential Epcot. The plan showcased a number of elements which over time would all eventually come into fruition, including the World Showcase, the Living Seas, the Space Pavilion, and, relevant to this video, the Life and Health Pavilion, although that one took a little bit of extra time to emerge. Visually taking inspiration from the circus and general whimsy, the Life and Health Pavilion set out to allow guests to develop a new awareness and appreciation of themselves, while learning that good health is based, more than anything, on their own personal responsibility and behaviour. The giant space would combine live performances, shows, and other entertainment offerings to convey this message, educating guests on the impact of different lifestyle choices and showcasing exhibits on medical developments. There were three main components outlined in the original proposal that were set to shape the pavilion. The Joy of Living, a multimedia show which would extol the beauty, dignity and strength of man from birth to the golden years. The Great Midway of Life, simply described as a whimsical set of experiences. And today's focus, The Incredible Journey Within, an attraction that would take guests to explore the incredible inner workings of the fascinating, complex human machine. While the other attractions were appealing enough, The Incredible Journey Within was set to be the key hallmark attraction and the main draw of the pavilion, serving as the area's only e-ticket ride. The conceptualised ride was of grand and epic, unparalleled proportions, with guests entering and venturing through the body on a blood cell, passing giant animatronic replicas of organs including a beating heart and 30-foot-high breathing lungs. Other featured body parts mentioned across sources include the kidneys, bone surface with gorily attached ligaments, the spleen and the brain itself. This new ride was widely accepted to have been intended to use the same suspended ride system seen in Magic Kingdom's Peter Pan ride, but some concept art shows more of a raised clamshell design, similar to those seen in the Haunted Mansion. In other pieces of concept art, the low-sitting blood vessel vehicles appeared more adjacent to boats or inflatable rings seen in the water parks, and there were even some walkthrough sections depicted, suggesting that nearly every possible incarnation of this ride had been considered. But across all concepts, one thing was consistent. The interior was huge and intricate, featuring floor-to-ceiling set pieces and bold green and blue lighting effects which starkly contrasted the pink-toned innards. It was also bold and visually dissimilar to anything that had debuted in the parks before. Well, almost. There were some thematic similarities between this proposed ride and an existing dark ride over in Disneyland, Adventure Through Inner Space. Operating as the first ride with an Omnimover system, Adventure Through Inner Space opened in 1967, and narratively shrunk guests down to the size of atoms before taking them through scenes of oversized snowflakes, water molecules and electrons until its closure in 1985, at which point it was replaced by a state-of-the-art simulator ride based around a little-known intergalactic franchise, Star Tours, which would open in 1987. Although Adventure Through Inner Space was a somewhat stripped-down version of everything that the ambitious Incredible Journey Within was hoping to be, it proved that it was at least a somewhat viable concept for the parks, even if only on a smaller scale. So, surely, following the execution of the concept's exact foundations and all of these amazing pieces of concept art depicting huge, intricate scenes, it was inevitable that something grand would emerge. After all, it had been 20 years since Adventure Through Inner Space had opened, which seems like plenty of time to improve the craft and establish the technology necessary for a groundbreaking spiritual successor. But alas, after an additional 7 years of brainstorming and conceptualising following Epcot's opening, there was no Incredible Journey Within to be found when the Pavilion finally debuted in 1989. So, what happened to the Incredible Journey Within, and what went in its place? Let's go back a few years prior to the Pavilion's opening to find our answer. In 1987, a press release was distributed outlining the details of the new MetLife-sponsored Life and Health Pavilion, officially dubbed The Wonders of Life. It shared details of the elaborately landscaped area and its whimsical contents, which included a 200-seat theatre show with animatronics, computer-driven health-related activities, and some educational exhibits too, as promised. And in addition to a few other derivations of the originally proposed ideas, there was one new standout ride on this lineup: Body Wars. This new ride was a vivid and realistic journey through the human body, which still felt very true to the original concept, even if there had been some major changes. Here, in place of an Omnimover and abstract imagery, or a boat ride past animatronic lungs, guests would sit inside a sleek LGS 250 body probe vehicle and be scientifically miniaturised to the size of a single human cell, far more effective than the previously proposed blood vessel. The ride was worked on at various stages by some excellent Imagineers like Barry Braverman, who would later go on to work on big-name projects like Disney California Adventure. Once aboard the probe, adventurous guests would explore the realm inside the human body on a mission to rendezvous with, and subsequently save, a free-floating researcher who had already entered the body to study the impact site of a splinter, but all was not as it seems, though more on that later. As you can see, there were a lot of similarities and parallels across the three ideas, and for me, that's what makes Body Wars a really interesting development. It truly is a reflection of the visions before, but there was one major change that really set the new ride apart from its predecessors, and it's one which, given the current preference for screen-based attractions in many theme parks, won't seem too unfamiliar to a modern audience. Body Wars would not use suspended ride vehicles, omnimovers or boats, physical set pieces or animatronics, but rather it would utilise a system only seen once before on the West Coast, a simulator. You may remember earlier that I mentioned a state-of-the-art simulator ride which replaced Adventure Through Inner Space in passing, and that ride was Star Tours, which, as I said, debuted back in 1987 in Disneyland, the same year that the Wonders of Life Pavilion and its contents were finally announced. You're right if you think that's more than a coincidence. One of the key strengths of the Incredible Journey Within was also its biggest weakness, its intricacy and complexity, as unfortunately you can't so readily cut corners with human anatomy as you can with other fictional offerings. However, with the new technology that debuted with Star Tours, Imagineers were able to capture the fluid, and depending where you are in the story, unashamedly jolty, motions, and present the detailed imagery they were hoping to convey. Instead of a static set piece, they now had a powerful hydraulic machine that facilitated active storytelling over showing and telling, and that's where Body Wars comes into the conversation. The new ride would use 4 $500,000 military-grade flight simulators and Lucasfilm technology alongside precisely matched video to create an intense attraction themed around exploration of the human machine. As you can see, Star Tours was absolutely instrumental to the development of Body Wars, and possibly the only reason the ride manifested as it did, and beyond that, possibly one of the only reasons that we ever got the Wonders of Life Pavilion at all. As a little side note, I love how the use of the same simulator system perfectly captures how history inadvertently repeats itself, with Adventure Through Inner Space being removed to make way for Star Tours back in 1985, and similarly, the Incredible Journey Within concept being shelved to make way for Body Wars. While I'm confident this was just a silly coincidence, it's weird that it happened twice. Upon opening, the attraction bore a striking thematic resemblance to a handful of award-winning body exploration films, including the 1987 Joe Dante film Inner Space, and the 1966 film it was inspired by, Fantastic Voyage. The video for this new ride was directed by the creative powerhouse that is Leonard Nimoy, who you may know from his Star Trek days. But now, the bit we've all been waiting for, the ride experience, which I will be largely stealing from my Wonders of Life history video, so apologies if it does feel familiar. I'll pop a timestamp in the description if you'd like to jump forward to the next section. In a very classic 1980s science fiction depiction of events, guests were informed about the research trip they'd be undertaking by a very serious man in red, dubbed only as Mission Control Officer, who was played by Dakin Matthews, the Desperate Housewives Reverend I mentioned earlier. But prior to this introduction, guests were subject to one easily missable overhead video. Dr. Fletcher, the chief scientist at the Miniaturization Centre, introduced himself and outlined the daily threats to health that the body faces. He then went on to share how, for the first time, courtesy of miniaturization technology, scientists can now enter the body aboard teeny tiny ships to gain valuable knowledge in the war against disease, and to perform once impossible operations from inside the body. Before guests would move on, he made a very quick nod to the upcoming mission. And that's where the official pre-show begins. Between Mr. Mission Control and an orientation officer named Jane, the ride's plot, logic, and in-world processes were established. On a mission operated by the Miniaturized Exploration Technologies Company, that's MET for short, guests would be boarding a 26-ton ship, captained by the ever-so-smouldery Captain Braddock, and would be miniaturized down to the size of a human cell before penetrating the skin's epidermal layer via what was effectively a laser beam. Once inside, they would join another researcher, Dr. Cynthia Lair, played by Elizabeth Shue, who was already inside the body studying the speed and effectiveness of white blood cells at the target splinter site, and bring her out. After a very of-its-time no-smoking warning, the mission is underway. Reduction mode begins and the Met ship is shrunk down. Smouldery Captain Braddock doubles up as a tour guide to explain the processes seen before you, and we bump into Dr. Lair, who's capturing one final cell sample. Suddenly, in an unexpected turn of events, there's a mayday call and Dr. Lair is pulled into a capillary. Just like that, the research trip would turn into a turbulent rescue mission across the body. Braddock then enters an unauthorised area of the body while trying to retrieve Lair, and the mission intensifies even further as the ship's fuel levels drops after losing a fuel cell. Mission Control shouts vague yet intense warnings while Lair boards the ship, and in a last-ditch effort to escape the body and remove the need for a secondary rescue mission, Braddock pilots the ship through various organs to the brain, using the heart's beat as a propellant in lieu of appropriate fuel. Oh, and by the way, the ship has lasers. After an energy shutdown in the spinal cord, the brain's electric energy provides the final push needed to restart the ship, facilitating its exit from the body and their return to normal size. The entire ride took place inside an advanced technology leisure application simulator, with the simulator's movements aligned with the video on the screen for a fully immersive experience. If you've ever been on Star Tours, you'll understand why it wasn't for everybody, as its intense, turbulent motion with sharp turns and sudden drops left some guests feeling queasy. So much so that the first version of the ride, which included a very intense whooshing lung sequence, was shortened and the section was cut out around 1990, perhaps to make the ride slightly more palatable. So, how did a ride that seemed to be at the forefront of its technological field close so quickly, operating on a full-time schedule for just 15 years, while its counterparts would thrive for decades? The downfall of Body Wars is one which is tinged with mystery, given how popular it was initially, but I wouldn't feel too hesitant to wager that it was at least partially attributed to the subject matter. It's subjectively hard to make medicine and science fun for the masses without falling into cliches, and in this attraction, the struggle shows. I am a die-hard Wonders of Life fan, but this pre-show is a bit of a tough watch even for me, as instead of playing off the sense of urgency you often see in pre-shows of the present, the thrills in Body Wars are reserved for the ride itself. So as guests would walk through a straight out of science fiction corridor, it could understandably seem like a purely educational ride, leading guests to give up before they've even boarded. And this was a sentiment that resounded throughout most of the pavilion, with it seeming too boring and too much like school for a lot of guests to even entertain the idea of visiting. Similarly, something that I've explored in my video dedicated wholly to the pre-show model that I'll link in the description, this somewhat dull pre-show almost certainly kills any sense of re-rideability. Another potential contributing factor is that there really was only room for one identical simulator ride in this town. While this has been fairly challenged in one of my previous comment sections, it's possible that with the opening of the less intense IP-integrated Star Tours over in Hollywood Studio, guests that had already queued for a simulator ride elsewhere may have decided it simply wasn't worth using their valuable park time to ride another, especially one themed around the human body. However, even today, despite the guest preference for the ride's IP counterpart, the wait times for Star Tours in Hollywood Studios typically peak around 20 minutes, only exceeding this on busy weekends or holidays. So perhaps regardless of character integration or film replicability, the simulator ride model was simply just born to die. There were also other factors to consider, like the wider decline of the pavilion, which would see no major updates in its entire operating life, and, following the departure of its sponsor, would grow ever more stagnant with restaurants and shops closing shortly after. But regardless of whether Epcot fell out of favour with day trippers who would choose alternative parks, the pavilion was too tucked away, or the nausea induction was too much for an otherwise laid-back boat-filled park, the ride grew less popular and was operating well below its capacity well before its untimely closure in 2004, at which point the entire pavilion would switch to seasonal operation before closing in 2007. After the pavilion closed, the space was used for various festivals in the park for the next decade, offering up a base for tastings, merchandise stands and educational sessions, but with each year that passed, there was less of the original pavilion left. Murals were stripped, spell-out signage removed, and queue areas blocked off in just a few years, but it would be a decade before any major work occurred behind the curtain. Risk-taking urban explorers would venture behind the scenes and delve back into the eerily lifeless queue corridors. Their videos of hollow halls, frozen countdowns, and removed signage were the first indicators that Body Wars was truly approaching the point of no return, although this complete removal was a long time coming. When Star Tours The Adventure Continues was being created, early versions of the ride would be tested out in the Body Wars simulators as, remember, they use the same ride system. It would later be confirmed by Disney themselves that presumably around and from 2010 when the reimagined Star Tours opened, the Body Wars simulators were also stripped for parts to replace sections of the Star Tours vehicles. Quickly, it would be reported that by November 2014, the Body Wars simulators had been removed entirely, and despite the queues still being intact, most of the lighting and electronic equipment had also been removed. And with that, the possibility of Body Wars, and the Wonders of Life Pavilion as a whole, ever making a comeback was all but quashed. A bit of a miserable ending, I know, but unfortunately there is literally no hope left for a reappearance, and all plans to update the pavilion have fallen through thus far. I have a sneaking suspicion that an update, whether of a retheme or its removal, will be announced by the end of the year, but for now, our story of Body Wars comes to an end. It's likely a story you've heard 100 times, but if you're anything like me, you'll never be able to hear it enough. And if that is the case, I definitely recommend giving my complete history of the Wonders of Life video a watch after this one for a broader look into the defunct pavilion. But if you are watching it before my updated video is uploaded, I apologise in advance for the questionable Windows Movie Maker audio editing. We've had some serious upgrades since then. So, from its pre-opening conception to its ultimate undignified closure, Body Wars has lived 1,000 lives, and was only made possible due to a series of unparalleled technological developments by the Walt Disney Company, and the bravery to try something new. But now it's time to turn the floor to you. Did you ever ride Body Wars, and if you did, was it a one and done, or was it a quiet fan favourite? Do you think the ride deserves a resurgence, or was its closure fair and righteous? As always, if anyone worked or knows anyone who worked on the Wonders of Life Pavilion in any capacity, I'd implore you to reach out to me, as I'd be thrilled to hear your stories and borrow your crew jackets. But in the meantime, regardless of your employment history, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel, turning on notifications to ensure you don't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. I'm not normally a beg, but we are so close to 1,000 subscribers, which is so exciting, and I'd love for you to come along for my theme park history ventures. You can also check out the links in the description to support me on alternative platforms. As I alluded to earlier, there's plenty of Wonders of Life content coming your way, which you definitely do not want to miss out on. But until then, thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.